I'm Vanessa, 34. After 7 years of marriage to Gregory, I still felt like an outsider in his wealthy Caldwell family. The breaking point came at a summer BBQ when his sister Amanda sneered, "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice." They all laughed, even Gregory. I just raised my hot dog locked eyes with her and said, "Challenge accepted." That night I left. 1 year later I returned not as Gregory's overlooked wife, but as a successful designer who had rebuilt her life from scratch. By disappearing from their world, I finally became fully visible in my own. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. Her words hung in the humid summer air, settling into my chest like wet cement. Around the picnic table, laughter erupted sharp, bright and echoing across the manicured lawn of the Caldwell estate. Gregory chuckled too, not cruelly, just reflexively, the way you laugh at a joke you didn't quite hear but know you're supposed to find funny. Amanda smirked over the rim of her wine glass, her eyes glinting with a kind of triumphant boredom, as if my insignificance was merely an amusing observation on an otherwise unremarkable afternoon. I sat there, hot dog in hand, feeling the precise moment my heart hardened into something cold and immovable. 7 years of marriage, of volunteering at Patricia's charity events, of memorizing the names of Richard's colleagues, of laughing at Michael's crude jokes, of smiling through Amanda's barbed comments about my little design hobby. It all compressed into a singular clarity. They would never see me, not truly. But that day, something shifted inside me. I didn't cry. I didn't stand up and storm away. I didn't throw my drink in Amanda's perfectly made-up face, though a darker, wilder part of me wanted to watch her mascara run. Instead, I raised my hot dog in a mock toast, met her gaze directly, and said evenly, "Challenge accepted." A brief hush fell over the table. Confusion flickered across Amanda's face before she recovered, tilting her head with a tight smile. Gregory glanced between us, his brow furrowing slightly, sensing something had shifted, but too preoccupied with Richard's monologue about imported smokers to ask what. Then Patricia clapped her hands lightly and chirped, "Who's ready for brisket?" The moment dissolved into the sticky summer air. But I didn't. That moment crystallized into resolve. That night, while Gregory slept beside me, snoring softly in the king-sized bed of our suburban dream home, I lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling fan, spinning lazily above. Every rotation sounded like a clock ticking down to the life I was about to abandon. 7 years. 7 years of silencing my opinions to keep the peace, of shrinking my ambitions to fit the small space allotted to me within the Caldwell narrative, of being told in words and in silence that my worth was conditional, dependent on my compliance, my politeness, my gratitude for belonging, where I so clearly didn't. At 2:00 a.m., I swung my legs out of bed, feeling the cold floor steady me. I padded to my home office, powered up my laptop, and began the methodical work of orchestrating my disappearance, bank accounts, apartment listings, flight options, mental calculations of what I would take and what I would leave behind. By dawn, I had a plan. When Gregory left for his golf game with Richard later that morning, pressing a distracted kiss to my hair, I didn't cry. I didn't cling. I simply whispered goodbye as the door clicked shut. 2 hours later, my essentials were packed into my car clothes, personal documents, my design equipment, and a small box of irreplaceable memories. On the kitchen counter, I left my wedding ring atop a folded letter, explaining that I needed time away to reevaluate our marriage. I asked for space and no contact. Beside it, for clarity, I wrote Amanda's words verbatim, with the date and location, like an evidence tag in a criminal investigation. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. Amanda Caldwell, summer. BBQ, July 14th. As I pulled out of our driveway for the last time, I felt a tightness in my chest, loosened by degrees. With every mile marker that passed, it became easier to breathe. By the time I crossed the state line, the tears came not out of grief, but relief so profound it bordered on joy. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. We'll see about that. Because disappearing wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. I met Gregory in the most ordinary way, in a life that back then felt anything but ordinary. It was our final year at university. I was juggling my graphic design degree with late-night shifts at a local coffee shop to cover tuition. He was breezing through his business program, his entire education funded effortlessly by his parents. We occupied parallel worlds on the same campus, but we might never have collided if he hadn't walked in that Thursday night, looking for caffeine to fuel his all-nighter. I remember exactly what I was reading behind the counter. The Bell Jar, my third time through the pages, soft and familiar under my fingertips. He ordered a large Americano, then paused, eyeing the cover. "Plath," he said, tilting his head with genuine curiosity. "Isn't that a bit heavy for a late shift?" I shrugged, returning his smile despite the exhaustion buzzing in my bones. "Better than business textbooks." That made him laugh, a warm, open laugh that drew glances from the other sleepy students hunched over their laptops. He asked what I liked about the book. I asked what he was studying tonight. The conversation flickered to life, unexpected and effortless, until the next customer interrupted us. Before leaving, he glanced at my name tag and said, "See you around, Vanessa." He came back 2 nights later then again, until it became a pattern I both anticipated and dreaded. He'd stay at the bar chatting between sips while I cleaned milk pitchers or stocked syrups. He asked about my design projects, remembered small details I barely remembered telling him. I found myself looking up whenever the bell above the door rang, hoping it would be him. Our first date was spontaneous. His roommate had bailed on a midnight screening of Inception, and he asked if I'd go instead. We sat in the dark cinema, our arms brushing once-twice, until he finally reached over and took my hand, his thumb tracing slow circles across my palm. When the credits rolled, we walked out into the crisp winter air, still holding hands like we'd been doing it forever. The next morning, he brought coffee to my apartment door, 2 lattes balanced in a cardboard tray, his grin sleepy but triumphant. "Breakfast date," he declared, stepping over my startled roommate's piles of laundry. That was Gregory Decisive, charming a man who carved out space for himself wherever he went. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. He took me to expensive restaurants I could never have afforded, praised my designs like they were genius, and kissed me like he was discovering a secret. For the first time, I felt truly seen, not as the girl who could barely pay rent, not as the daughter of a single mother working 2 jobs, but as someone extraordinary. By graduation, he proposed with a diamond ring that cost more than my entire student debt. We stood on the bluff overlooking the city skyline, dusk blurring the harsh edges of buildings into glowing possibility. His hands trembled slightly as he slid the ring onto my finger, and in that moment I saw only love, pure and unfiltered. I saw a future filled with promise. "I want to take care of you," he whispered, pressing his forehead to mine. "Let me take care of you." Back then, those words felt like safety, like belonging, like coming home. I said yes without hesitation. The first time I visited Gregory's family home, I felt like I'd stepped onto a movie set. Their colonial-style house sprawled across half an acre of manicured lawn, with white columns framing a wide porch, wrapped in climbing roses. Inside, everything gleamed polished mahogany floors, intricate Persian rugs, curated art on every wall. Even the scent bergamot and old money felt curated. Gregory had warned me to just be myself, but I wasn't sure which version of myself that was in this world. The girl who grew up sharing a bedroom with her sister while their mom worked double shifts at the diner. The girl who made prom dresses from thrift store, finds and taught herself Photoshop on a used laptop. There was no precedent in me for the world of the Caldwells. Patricia, his mother, greeted me with a breezy air kiss that missed my cheek by inches. "Vanessa, dear, you're even prettier in person," she said, her eyes already flicking to the dessert I carried. Oh, homemade strawberry shortcake. How quaint. Gregory's father, Richard, shook my hand with the firm grip of a man who closed million-dollar deals before breakfast. Over dinner, he asked about my design major, then proceeded to explain basic marketing principles to me, as if I were a high school intern. I nodded politely, focusing on cutting my steak into perfect bites, aware of Patricia's eyes tracking my table manners. Then there was Amanda. She arrived late, hair sleek, makeup impeccable, sliding into her seat with the easy confidence of someone born, knowing their place in the world. When I introduced myself, she smiled with polite disinterest and immediately turned back to her conversation with Gregory about his upcoming internship at their father's firm. The evening passed in a blur of laughter at jokes I didn't understand, references to family trips to St. Bart's and Aspen, and discussions about board memberships, investment portfolios, and Ivy League admissions. Each topic was a door I couldn't open, each conversation a subtle reminder that while Gregory fit seamlessly here, I was an invited guest, a temporary visitor in their curated reality. When we drove back to our dorm later that night, Gregory reached across the console and squeezed my hand. "They loved you," he said with sleepy certainty. "Amanda can be intense, but she's just trying to help you fit in." I pressed my forehead to the cool glass window, watching streetlights blur past in gold streaks. Fit in. The phrase felt like a puzzle piece I was sanding down to force into place. A piece that, no matter how I turned it, never quite matched the picture. Because my world had been so different. My mother exhausted after night shifts, falling asleep at the kitchen table while grading community college papers. Holidays filled with homemade gifts and potluck dinners where neighbors brought casseroles in chipped ceramic dishes. My sister Olivia and I cutting snowflakes from printer paper to decorate our tiny apartment windows. Our life was noisy, cluttered, filled with second-hand furniture and first-hand love. It wasn't effortless like the Caldwells. It was built day by day, meal by meal, hug by hug. Gregory never made me feel small for where I came from. He admired my independence, the way I worked 2 jobs without complaint, how I stretched $40 into a week's worth of groceries. But his family, they didn't even have to try to make me feel small. It was woven into the fabric of their interactions. A casual, unthinking superiority that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Back then, I told myself that love could bridge those differences, that if I tried hard enough, dressed the right way, spoke with confidence, learned the names of wines and luxury designers, I'd become someone who belonged at their table. I didn't realize then that trying to belong to someone else's world meant slowly erasing pieces of my own. They never told me outright that I didn't belong. The Caldwells were far too polite for that. Their rejections came wrapped in silk, tied with ribbons of civility. At family dinners, Patricia would tilt her head with that perfectly composed smile as I described a branding project I was working on. "How wonderful, you keep yourself busy, Vanessa," she'd say. "Keep yourself busy." As if my career was a hobby to stave off boredom while waiting for Gregory to come home. Richard, ever the patriarch, offered business advice like confetti. At first, I accepted it gratefully, thinking he was trying to mentor me. But over time, I realized he explained basic marketing strategies I'd taught myself years ago, ignoring the portfolio I'd built before Gregory ever entered my life. "You should try designing logos for real companies, not just cafes and bakeries," he said once, carving roast beef with surgeon-like precision. I swallowed my reply that cafes and bakeries were real companies, that my work lit up their storefronts and gave them identities customers remembered. Instead, I just nodded and passed the horseradish. Amanda, though, was the master. Her microaggressions glittered sharp and beautiful like cut glass. At a Christmas dinner, she asked what wine I preferred, then corrected my pronunciation with a saccharine smile. Viognier, not Veonnet, sweetie. Easy mistake. When I complimented her dress at Easter brunch, she thanked me with a tilt of her head. "It's Prada. I'm sure you could find a similar cut at Anthropology." During a family weekend in the Hamptons, I dared to voice an opinion about one of Richard's marketing campaigns after he asked what I thought. Amanda didn't even look up from her phone. "That's adorable," she said, thumbs flying over her screen. "Graphic design opinions on corporate branding. Love that for you." Gregory always brushed it off. "She's just teasing Ness. That's how Amanda shows love. She pushes people." I tried to believe him. Tried to believe that Amanda's barbs were signs of acceptance, like siblings squabbling over the TV remote. But with every correction, every dismissive comment, I felt myself shrinking, curling inward like a flower, deprived of light. At our wedding, her maid of honor speech included loving anecdotes about Gregory's ex-girlfriends. How smart they were, how graceful, how fun. She ended with, "But of course, Vanessa is lovely in her own way. Welcome to the family." Everyone clapped politely as my face burned hot enough to melt steel. When Gregory and I bought our first home, Amanda visited with a forced smile, glancing around the modest living room. "It's cute," she said. "Are you sure it's the right neighborhood for a Caldwell, though? But I suppose it suits your style." When I landed a major client, my first 5-figure contract, Amanda asked over dinner, "Do you think they hired you because of your work or because you're Gregory's wife?" Each comment was a paper cut, tiny, almost invisible, easy to dismiss on their own. But layered over days, weeks, years, they became wounds that refused to heal. Still, I tried. God, how I tried. I learned their wine varietals, their designers, their boarding schools. I laughed at their inside jokes even when I didn't understand the punchline. I offered free design work for Patricia's charity events. I referred clients to Richard's firm. I remembered everyone's birthdays with thoughtful handmade gifts that always received polite thanks, but never the awe that Amanda's luxury purchases inspired. I thought if I could just be perfect enough, kind enough, useful enough, they would see me, accept me, love me. But no matter what I did, I remained that girl from the wrong zip code. The girl with the mother who worked 2 jobs. The girl who mispronounced French wines. The girl who needed to be managed rather than embraced. Years later, when Amanda sneered at the BBQ, "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice it wasn't an outlier," it was the culmination of every small cut she'd inflicted since the day we met. And in that moment, I realized I could keep bleeding to death by paper cuts, or I could walk away and finally heal. For the first few years, I fought to keep myself intact. I maintained my freelance design business, working late into the night, while Gregory snored softly beside me. My clients were small cafes, artisan bakeries, local yoga studios, businesses built on dreams like mine. Each successful logo felt like an anchor to the person I used to be before I became Gregory's wife. Sometimes, after sending off a finished branding package, I'd sit alone at my desk, a mug of cold coffee in hand, and allow myself a small smile. This is who I am, I'd think. This is mine. Then came Gregory's promotion. The company offered to expand his division, if he agreed to travel extensively. Chicago, Tokyo, London, Shanghai. The list of cities sounded glamorous, but to me they were empty placeholders for absence. There was no discussion about what this meant for my career. No weighing of options, no consideration of compromise. It was simply assumed that I would adapt, that I would scale back my business to manage our home, keep schedules coordinated, hold the fort down while he conquered the world. At the celebratory dinner, Patricia raised her champagne flute. To Gregory's brilliance, she said, beaming with pride. Then her gaze flicked to me, and to Vanessa for making it all possible. I smiled politely as everyone clinked glasses, but the words lodged in my throat like a bone. Making it all possible. As if I were the administrative assistant to his success. As if my only value lay in how well I facilitated his dreams. I tried to keep my business going, but client meetings clashed with airport drop-offs and last-minute dry cleaning pickups. My creative energy drained away into grocery lists and dinner plans for one. Each time Gregory returned from a trip, he seemed bigger, shinier, filled with stories of rooftop bars and Michelin-starred sushi counters, while I shrank a little further into the walls of our quiet suburban home. He never asked about the projects I'd paused or the clients I'd lost. He'd kiss me hello, place a duty-free perfume on the kitchen counter, and slip into detailed accounts of his meetings and deals, barely noticing when I flinched at the prices he recited so casually. Then last spring, I miscarried at 11 weeks. The pain came in waves so intense I nearly blacked out on the bathroom floor. I called Gregory, my voice hoarse from screaming into a towel. He was in Chicago for a conference. Should I come home? He asked, his voice taut with obligation rather than anguish. I pictured him in his hotel room, suit jacket draped over a chair, laptop open with presentation slides glowing in the dark. I heard the undertone. He didn't say, "I'll come if you insist, but please don't insist." "It's okay," I whispered. "I can manage." He exhaled in relief. Patricia sent flowers the next day, white lilies with a cream envelope tucked between the stems. Her note was written in her impeccable cursive. "Perhaps it's for the best until you're more settled." Settled. As if grief were something messy. I needed to tidy up before attempting motherhood again. Amanda's message was a single-line text. "Stress isn't good for pregnancy. Maybe you should focus more on home than your little business next time." Only Olivia came. My sister showed up that evening with a thermos of homemade chicken soup, her hair damp from the bus ride in the rain. She kicked off her shoes at the door and sat on the floor beside my bed spoon, feeding me broth between sobs. She stayed for a week, folding my laundry, brushing my hair each morning, like she used to when we were little. She lay behind me at night, her hand warm and steady on my back, as silent tears soaked my pillow. When she finally left, the emptiness roared so loud I pressed my hands over my ears just to silence it. The Caldwells never spoke of it again. At dinner a month later, Amanda was recounting her upcoming trip to Florence, while Patricia debated centerpieces for the summer gala. Richard asked Gregory about a new investment portfolio. Gregory squeezed my thigh under the table, a silent demand for composure. I smiled and passed the butter dish, my fingers trembling. In that moment, I realized that grief is bearable when it's shared. But theirs wasn't shared grief. It was a silent inconvenience. Another performance to be perfected, then erased. The following weeks blurred together. I began waking before dawn, staring at the ceiling fan, spinning shadows across our bedroom walls. I'd pad to the kitchen, sit in the dark with a mug of untouched coffee, and listen to the silence pressing in from all sides. My design work turned mechanical. I churned out social media templates and ebook covers with detached precision. The girl who used to sketch logo drafts at 2 a.m. out of pure creative thrill now uploaded final files without pride or excitement. My friendships atrophied. When Jessica called, I let it ring out. When my old college professor emailed about a guest speaking opportunity, I deleted it. When Olivia suggested I visit for a girls' weekend, I lied and said I was too busy. Busy. That was the lie I told everyone, including myself. The truth was simpler. I had become invisible in my own life. Still hope flickered. Hope that maybe if I just tried harder, cooked better meals, wore prettier dresses, smiled wider, worked less, worked more, spoke less, spoke more, maybe I could finally earn a place at their table. By the time the annual summer BBQ rolled around, that hope was all that kept me upright. I spent 3 hours baking my grandmother's strawberry shortcake, carefully slicing berries into uniform pieces, whipping cream by hand until my arms burned. I wore a new sundress in Patricia's preferred casual elegance palette, pale yellow with delicate white flowers tight across my shoulders, but pretty enough to pass. As we drove to the Caldwell estate, Gregory reminded me Dad's unveiling his new imported smoker today. Try to act impressed, okay? Even if you don't get why it's a big deal. I nodded, clutching my dessert carrier to my chest, feeling its cool weight settle over my pounding heart. I still believed then foolishly that if I played my part well enough, someone, anyone, would finally look up from their curated, perfect lives and say, "We see you. You belong here." But I didn't understand yet that I was trying to belong to a family that only loved people who mirrored them, and mirrors don't reflect those who stand too far away. The Caldwell Summer BBQ wasn't just a family gathering. It was a spectacle. Every July, Patricia curated the guest list with military precision neighbors, business associates, distant cousins flown in to maintain familial optics. Richard showcased his grilling gadgets like trophies, discussing imported smokers and wood chip varieties with evangelical zeal. Amanda floated through the crowd in effortlessly chic linen dresses, greeting guests with air kisses and conspiratorial whispers that made people lean in closer. It was an event where status was cemented, alliances were reaffirmed, and outsiders were quietly reminded of their place. That morning, I woke before sunrise to make my grandmother's strawberry shortcake. It was the only dish that had ever received genuine compliments from Patricia, back when I first joined their family. I whipped the cream by hand until my shoulders ached, layering the biscuits and berries with painstaking care. As I spread the final swirl of cream across the top, I imagined Patricia tasting it and nodding in quiet approval. The fantasy felt childish, but I clung to it anyway. Gregory spent the morning on calls finalizing details for his upcoming Tokyo trip. When it was time to leave, he rushed me out the door, eyes flicking impatiently to his Rolex. Dad's unveiling the smoker at noon. We can't be late. I sat in the passenger seat sundress tight across my ribs, dessert carrier balanced on my lap. My palms sweated against the plastic handle. Gregory didn't notice. He scrolled through emails, humming under his breath. When we arrived, the Caldwell lawn was already alive with activity. Caterers in black polos wove through clusters of guests, offering tiny skewers of grilled shrimp. Richard stood at the center of the patio, surrounded by admiring men, as he demonstrated the temperature settings on his new smoker. Patricia floated from group to group, her laugh high and tinkling like crystal. Amanda spotted us as we entered through the side gate. "Gregory!" she squealed, air kissing his cheek, before turning her gaze to me. Her eyes flicked over my dress with a practiced sweep. "Vanessa." She said, her smile too wide. "That dress is cheerful. The kitchen's crowded, but I'm sure you'll find somewhere to put your contribution." She looped her arm through Gregory's, steering him away before I could respond. I stood there for a moment, dessert in hand, feeling ridiculous. Then I walked to the kitchen. Patricia was directing catering staff with brisk authority. When she saw me, her eyes flickered to the shortcake. "Oh, Vanessa dear, You didn't need to bring anything. The patisserie is handling desserts." She gestured vaguely toward the pantry. But how thoughtful. Perhaps put it there for now. I placed my dessert on a crowded pantry shelf alongside foil-covered dishes from other unimportant guests. As I turned to leave, I heard Patricia instruct a server to make room on the dessert table for Amanda's tiramisu. Authentic Italian, flown in from New York. The next 2 hours blurred into a haze of polite smiles and stilted conversations. Every time I began speaking to one of Gregory's cousins, Patricia swept them away to introduce them to someone more relevant. I offered to help set up the buffet, but was told the caterers had it under control. I tried joining a conversation about recent films, only to be talked over by Amanda recounting her trip to Cannes. Charlotte Michael's wife received an entirely different reception. Married into the family, only 2 years she was introduced proudly by Patricia to every guest Charlotte, our brilliant pediatric surgeon. Even Richard asked her thoughtful questions about child neurology, nodding with genuine interest. I watched Charlotte smile politely, her discomfort evident. But at least she was seen. Lunchtime arrived. Gregory reappeared at my side plate in hand. Having fun, he asked, not waiting for an answer, before steering me to the main table on the patio. I sat between Uncle Frank, who was nearly deaf, and an empty seat left for Amanda. Gregory sat across from me, already deep in conversation with Richard about Japanese business etiquette. Amanda arrived moments later, placing her perfect plate down with a soft clink, and immediately launching into a story about a celebrity sighting at her gym. Patricia beamed. Charlotte asked follow-up questions. Even Frank leaned in nodding, despite likely hearing nothing. I seized a lull in the chatter. My voice sounded thin in the humid air. "I just finished a branding project for that new bakery downtown," I said. "They're having their grand opening next weekend." Amanda's eyes flicked to mine. "How nice. Is that the place with the tacky neon sign? I drove past it yesterday." "The signage is actually vintage-inspired," I explained quickly. "The owners wanted to honor the building's history as one of the 'if you disappeared tomorrow.'" Amanda interrupted with a theatrical sigh, leaning back in her chair. No one would even notice. "That's how boring this conversation is." The table erupted. Laughter exploded around me, uncontainable and cruel. Patricia tittered behind her napkin. Richard guffawed. Even Gregory chuckled, reaching for his beer with a dismissive shake of his head. Frank joined in, confused but happy to be part of the fun. The world blurred. My face burned while my hands turned to ice. I heard my heartbeat loud in my ears, felt the tremor in my chest. 7 years of being overlooked, explained away, dismissed it all, converged in that single searing moment. But I didn't cry. I didn't run. I didn't scream at her across the table like part of me wanted to. Instead, I picked up my hot dog, raised it like a glass locked eyes with Amanda, and said clearly, "Challenge accepted." For a moment, silence fell. Amanda's smile faltered. Gregory looked between us, confused, sensing something had shifted but unable to name it. Then Patricia chirped, "Who's ready for Richard to carve the brisket?" The conversation resumed. The laughter moved on. But something inside me didn't. That afternoon, as I floated ghost-like through the remainder of the BBQ, I watched them all the way they moved through this world, like it belonged to them. Gregory with his easy Caldwell confidence, Amanda with her savage poise, Patricia with her curated perfection, Richard with his casual, unthinking power. I realized in the glaring summer light that I could disappear tomorrow, and they truly wouldn't notice. And that, for the first time, felt like freedom. Because if they wouldn't notice me leaving, it meant I didn't owe them a performance to stay. That night, the Caldwell estate still buzzed with post-BBQ cleanup. Caterers packed up trays of untouched food. Patricia directed them in her soft, clipped voice. Gregory stood by Richard's side, nodding along as his father detailed plans for next summer's smoker upgrade. Amanda laughed with Michael near the patio, tossing her hair under the fairy lights. No one noticed me slip away. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, watching them all framed by golden lantern glow. The family I had spent 7 years trying to belong to, who never really saw me, never really wanted to. I waited for grief to come, for rage or regret to claw at my chest, but there was only a quiet, devastating calm. At home, I moved through our house like a ghost. Gregory fell asleep instantly, body heavy with beer, and sun mouth slightly open as he snored into his pillow. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the man I once thought was my forever. He looked peaceful, unburdened. Because in his world, everything was exactly as it should be. Except it wasn't. Not for me. At 2:00 a.m., I swung my feet onto the cold wooden floor. The moonlight slanted through the blinds, striping the room with silver bars. My heart beat steady, almost too calm for what I was about to do. I padded into my home office, flicked on the desk lamp, and opened my laptop. My fingers moved with methodical precision, checking personal bank accounts, transferring exactly half from our joint savings, not a penny more. I paid my share of the monthly bills due closed automatic subscriptions tied to my name, and typed out a list of essentials. My mind felt clear, crystalline, like a winter sky before dawn. Then I texted Jessica. I need a massive favor. The typing dots appeared immediately. Name it! I'm leaving Gregory today. Can you come help me pack the essentials? On my way. 2 hours later, Jessica arrived, hair tied in a messy bun, her face set in fierce determination. She hugged me once hard before setting down coffee and packing supplies. We worked silently but efficiently. Clothes, personal documents. My design laptop, external drives, the small carved wooden box holding my mother's wedding ring. Jessica wrapped my grandmother's strawberry shortcake dish in layers of newspaper. Leave it, I said softly. She paused, confusion in her eyes. It's your grandmother's. I shook my head. Not anymore. I don't want anything from today. By mid-morning, my car was packed with the distilled essence of my life. Jessica offered to store whatever didn't fit at her place. As we finished taping the last box, she glanced around the empty room. You ready? I nodded. The tears burned at the edges of my eyes, but I blinked them away. I had no time for sentimentality. Not now. Not when I was this close to freedom. In the kitchen, I laid my wedding ring on top of a folded letter. My handwriting was steady as I explained I needed time to reevaluate our marriage. That I had taken only what was indisputably mine. That I asked for space and no contact while I sorted my feelings. I did not say where I was going. I didn't owe him that. Beside the letter, I placed a single piece of paper with Amanda's words, written verbatim, the date and location noted clinically. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. Amanda Caldwell, BBQ July 14th. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. The house smelled of Gregory's cologne, sun-dried towels, lemon dish soap. All scents I used to associate with safety. Now they smelled like suffocation. Before leaving, I picked up our wedding photo from the hallway table. We looked so happy. Gregory's eyes crinkled with real joy. Mine sparkled with hope. I barely recognized her, the girl in that picture. She had no idea how invisible she would become. Goodbye, I whispered, replacing the frame. I walked out the door without looking back. The morning air hit my face cool and sharp, with the promise of dawn. As I drove away from our quiet cul-de-sac, the sky lightened by degrees, streaks of rose gold bleeding into indigo. With each passing mile, the tightness in my chest loosened. By the time I reached the state line, tears streamed down my cheeks, not from sadness, but from relief, so pure, It left me gasping, because for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't just disappearing from a life where I was invisible. I was choosing to reappear in my own. Seattle greeted me with rain. It fell in steady sheets as I crossed the bridge into the city, streaking the windshield with blurred lights. Each red brake light reflected back at me like a reminder. Stop. Pause. Breathe. I checked into a modest hotel using the credit card I'd kept in my name throughout our marriage. The room was small plain, nothing like the luxury suites Gregory and I stayed in on business trips. But it was quiet, and it was mine. I slept for 12 hours straight that night, curled beneath stiff white sheets. No Gregory's snoring, no Patricia's judgment, no Amanda's veiled insults replaying in my mind. Just the rain against the window and my own even breathing. The next morning I woke up with an ache in my chest that felt almost like hope. I called Olivia first. Her voice shook when she answered. "Are you okay?" she asked without preamble. "I'm safe," I said. I left. Silence crackled across the line before she whispered, "I'm so proud of you." Within days, she found me a small month-to-month studio in her neighborhood. The apartment had creaking wooden floors, bay windows that overlooked the gray street, and a kitchen counter worn smooth by years of meals and morning coffees. Where the Caldwell house felt like a museum curated for others' admiration, this place felt like a cocoon. The building's nothing fancy. Olivia apologized, helping me carry in boxes. "It's perfect," I said, running my hand over the scratched windowsill. "It's mine." That first week blurred into a series of practicalities. I opened a new bank account, purchased a Seattle area phone number, updated my freelance profiles, carefully removing any reference to Caldwell connections. Jessica shipped the rest of my belongings in unmarked boxes. Each arrival felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Gregory's texts began pouring in. "Where are you? Please call me." "This is ridiculous. Your mother is worried. At least let her know you're safe." "I have the Tokyo trip in 3 days." "Fine, take your space. We'll talk when I get back." Not once did he mention Amanda's words. Not once did he ask why I had left. Each message was about his confusion, his inconvenience, his need to maintain the narrative of our marriage. None were about me. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. My first clients were small projects on freelance platforms, ebook formatting simple social media templates. Nothing glamorous, nothing that screamed artistic triumph. But each invoice, paid, reminded me I could stand on my own. One rainy Tuesday, I walked into a neighborhood cafe. The walls were covered in bright abstract murals. While I waited for my latte, I asked the barista about them. "Local artist," she said proudly. "The owner is always looking for designers for menus and promo materials. You should talk to her." And so I met Eleanor. She was in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled into a loose bun and a direct assessing gaze. When I showed her my portfolio, she flipped past the polished corporate pieces and stopped at the experimental folder tucked in the back. "These," she said, tapping the screen. "These are yours. The others are pretty, but these are you." "I haven't done work like that in years," I admitted. "Well," she said, folding her arms across her chest, "that changes today. I want you to redesign my menu boards, but on one condition." "What's that?" "You do one personal piece every week. Anything. Just something that reminds you why you started designing in the first place." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Her words cracked something open inside me, something I thought was long dead. "Deal." I whispered. Eleanor became more than a client. She became a mentor, a quiet champion who pushed me to reconnect with my authentic voice. Through her, I met other small business owners who needed branding work. Within 3 months, my calendar filled with projects that excited me again. I found a therapist, Dr. Lewis, who specialized in women rebuilding after marital trauma. Our sessions often left me exhausted raw from excavating old wounds, but with each week I felt stronger, more whole. This wasn't just about Amanda's words, Dr. Lewis said during our third meeting. That was the catalyst. But what was the first straw, Vanessa? When did you first start disappearing? Her question unlocked memories I hadn't allowed myself to examine. The first time Gregory laughed when Patricia belittled my design work. The first time Amanda corrected my pronunciation, and I stayed silent. The first time I swallowed an opinion at dinner because I didn't want to ruin the mood. I began dating casually again. Nothing serious. Coffee dates, evening walks, conversations about art and books. Just enough to remind myself that I was desirable, interesting, worthy of attention. At night, I sat by my window overlooking the rain-soaked street, sketching designs that had no client brief, no marketing requirement, just colors, shapes, and lines that felt like me. Each stroke felt like reclaiming territory I had abandoned. Sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I would think of Amanda's words. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. And I would smile pencil, scratching across paper thinking, you were right about them. But you were wrong about me, because I was noticing. I was rebuilding a life where my presence mattered, where my voice wasn't just heard, but needed, where I didn't have to disappear to survive. 6 months after I left Gregory, my life finally felt like it belonged to me. My design calendar was full. Eleanor's Cafe redesign was featured in a local lifestyle magazine, bringing in a stream of new clients. I was working with an artisan bakery on their full rebrand, an indie publishing house on cover art for debut authors, and a yoga studio chain launching its first Seattle location. For the first time in years, I woke each morning feeling eager, rather than resigned. Then came the email that set everything in motion. Subject seeking designer for national campaign. From Westwood Creative. They were a major agency, one I'd quietly admired from afar for years. The message was brief but electric. We saw your work on Rainier Artisan Foods and believe your aesthetic is perfect for an upcoming project with Sheffield Consumer Brands. Initial meeting next week if interested. My pulse skittered across my ribs. Sheffield Consumer Brands, a subsidiary of Caldwell Marketing Group, Richard Caldwell's company. The irony was almost too perfect. 1 year ago, I'd been the silent wife at their dinner table, ignored and diminished. Now their subsidiary wanted to hire me on my own merit, unaware of my history with the family. Or maybe they were aware. The timing seemed too precise to be accidental. I called Eleanor my sounding board since day one in Seattle. Could be a coincidence, she said pragmatically. But if it isn't, the question is, would you take it anyway? I thought of Amanda's sneer. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. I thought of Gregory scrolling through his phone while I stared out our car window, invisible beside him. Yes, I said quietly. I'll take the meeting. Westwood's creative director Thomas made no mention of the Caldwells in our first Zoom call. He spoke only about brand philosophy, packaging goals, and design deadlines with brisk professionalism. We want a fresh, authentic look for their organic line, he explained. Something modern but rooted in storytelling. Your portfolio nails that balance. I accepted the project. Over the next few weeks, I worked with laser focus. Mood boards, sketches, prototype packaging. Each stage passed with glowing feedback from Westwood's internal team. There were no Caldwell names on the emails, only Sheffield's brand manager and Westwood's project coordinators. Then came the announcement Sheffield's rebranded line would be unveiled at the annual Marketing Innovation Gala, a black tie industry event hosted downtown. As lead designer, my attendance was highly encouraged. I read the email twice, the words vibrating on the screen. The Caldwells never missed this gala. For them, it was an essential networking spectacle, a chance for Richard to cement deals for Patricia, to flaunt social connections for Amanda to expand her personal brand presence. Gregory used to dread it, complaining about how fake everyone was, as he adjusted his tuxedo cufflinks in the mirror. Part of me wanted to decline, to avoid them entirely, to maintain the clean severance I had carved out so painstakingly. But another part, the part of me that raised a hot dog to Amanda's cruel words, and said, "Challenge accepted, refuse to be ruled by fear." My therapist, Dr. Lewis, asked me that week, what would Vanessa today do that Vanessa a year ago couldn't? She would go, I said without hesitation. She would go stand tall and speak for herself. The evening of the gala arrived with unexpected calm. I checked my reflection in the hotel room mirror before leaving. My tailored jumpsuit was deep emerald, structured yet soft, paired with minimal gold jewelry. My bobbed hair was sleek caramel highlights, catching the light as I turned my head. For the first time in years, I saw a woman I respected staring back at me. At the venue, chandeliers glittered over a sea of black tuxedos and jewel-toned gowns. Waitstaff circulated with champagne trays, their quiet efficiency echoing Patricia's catered events. My stomach flipped at the familiarity, but I straightened my shoulders and walked forward. Within 20 minutes, I was introduced to a circle of executives, editors, and creative directors. Business cards slid into my clutch as I discussed branding trends and design psychology. Their nods were genuine, their compliments direct. They saw me for what I was, a professional with expertise worth listening to. And then I felt it, the shift in the room's energy, a collective intake of breath, a ripple of curated greetings. I didn't have to turn to know the Caldwells had arrived. Richard's booming laugh confirmed it moments later. Patricia's icy perfume wafted through the air as she air-kissed acquaintances. Amanda's laughter practiced and sharp rang out over the music. I kept my focus on the Westwood team, finishing my commentary on typography choices before excusing myself for water at the bar. As I waited, I scanned the room quickly. And there he was. Gregory stood slightly apart from his family, thinner than I remembered his posture, more slumped, despite the flawless tailoring of his suit. His gaze swept across the crowd and froze when it landed on me. For a brief moment, time collapsed. His eyes widened, mouth parting as if to call out despite the distance. I held his gaze steady and unflinching. Then I turned to the bartender, thanked him for my drink, and walked away. Later that evening, as Thomas introduced me to Sheffield executives, Richard approached. His eyes flicked to my name badge, then to my face. Recognition dawned in a flicker he quickly masked with professional courtesy. "Vanessa," he said neutrally. "Quite a surprise." "Richard?" I nodded, my voice calm. "I'm the lead designer on Sheffield's rebrand." He blinked, disconcerted, for half a second before recovering. I hadn't realized Westwood was outsourcing creative. "Well, it looks impressive." "Thank you," I said, matching his business-like tone. "Initial consumer testing has been strong." His gaze lingered, assessing the differences in me. The posture, the eyes, the absence of apology. "You've evolved," he said. "Not evolved," I corrected softly. Returned to my authentic direction. Before he could respond, Thomas guided me toward the stage for final presentation prep. As we walked away, I didn't look back, because in that moment I understood something I hadn't known a year ago. You can't reclaim power from those who refuse to give it. You reclaim it by standing apart unbowed, knowing you never needed their permission in the first place. The Sheffield presentation felt like a dream I'd scripted for myself 1,000 times. I stood on stage under the warm white lights, the rebranded packaging designs projected 3 stories high behind me. My voice carried clearly as I explained color theory choices, consumer psychology data, and storytelling integration. From my vantage point, I saw them all. Richard sat in the front row, his expression impassive, but his fingers tapping thoughtfully against his knee. Patricia, seated beside him in a tailored ivory suit, wore her polite society smile, though her eyes flickered with discomfort each time my name was mentioned with praise. Amanda sat 2 seats down, legs crossed, jaw tight, as she whispered occasional comments to the woman beside her. And Gregory. He sat apart from them, closer to the aisle, hands folded in his lap. His gaze never left me, not once. When the applause came loud, spontaneous, unforced, I felt it like a physical wave washing over the stage. Thomas beamed beside me, shaking my hand before addressing the audience with closing notes. As we stepped down, people crowded around with questions and congratulations. Business cards, requests for follow-up meetings, compliments on the campaign's clarity and aesthetic vision. In the periphery of my focus, I saw Amanda approaching her stilettos clicking sharply against marble floors. "Vanessa," she said, voice low but edged with steel. "No one mentioned you were involved in this project." "I work with Westwood," I replied evenly, holding her gaze. "They value my design expertise." Thomas, still beside me, extended his hand to Amanda. "Ms. Caldwell, pleasure to meet you. Vanessa has been exceptional." Amanda's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "We're family. Or were. Professional connections take precedence here," I said, smiling calmly. "Enjoy the presentation." She opened her mouth to retort, but Thomas cut in. "Excuse us, Ms. Caldwell. We have press photos scheduled." As he steered me away, his hand warm and reassuring at my elbow, I exhaled the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. We posed for the photographer, the flash, bright but fleeting. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible in the photo. I felt real. Later that evening, as the gala transitioned into dinner, Gregory approached me near the bar. He looked tired, his suit impeccable as always, but the shadows under his eyes made him look older. "You look amazing," he said softly. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I'm leading the Sheffield campaign," I replied. "It's been a great project." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Your presentation, it was incredible." "Thank you," I said, meaning it. He shifted closer, lowering his voice. "I've thought about you every day since you left." I looked at him, really looked at the man who had once been my whole world. I saw the regret in his eyes, the confusion, the yearning. But it felt distant now, like watching someone else's memory projected onto a screen. "I believe you," I said gently. "But I don't think you understand why I left." "I do," he insisted, his voice breaking. Amanda's words that day, and I laughed. I've replayed it 1,000 times. It wasn't just Amanda's words, I said, my tone soft but unwavering. It was every moment I wasn't seen. Every time I was treated like a guest in my own life. Every time you laughed along or stayed silent. His shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry." "I know," I replied. "And I forgive you." But forgiveness isn't the same as return. We stood there in silence, surrounded by the hum of conversation and clinking glasses. 2 people once bound by love, now severed by truth. Finally, he asked, "Are you happy I let the question settle in my chest before answering?" "Yes. For the first time in so long, I am." He closed his eyes, briefly nodding with a pained acceptance. "I'm glad. Truly." I touched his hand lightly, a gesture of peace rather than affection. "Take care of yourself, Gregory." "You too, Ness." As I turned away, I felt Amanda watching from across the room. Our eyes locked, and for a brief moment, neither of us masked our true selves. Her stare was calculating, but beneath it, I saw something unfamiliar, uncertainty. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but I shook my head slightly. "Not here. Not tonight." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, new contacts, and quiet moments of solitude, where I allowed myself to breathe deeply, feeling the weight of old chains finally lifted. At midnight, as the gala lights dimmed and guests began drifting toward after-parties, I stepped outside into the cool Seattle air. The city glowed with quiet grandeur skyscraper windows, reflecting each other's light like infinite stars. I stood there clutching my small gold clutch to my chest, letting the night settle around me. Amanda's words from a year ago echoed faintly. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. But tonight I realized something profound. Disappearing from their world had made me finally visible in my own. Because liberation wasn't about making them see me. It was about seeing myself clearly, proudly, unapologetically, and knowing I never needed their approval to exist brightly. The morning after the gala, Seattle woke to rare spring sunshine. Golden light spilled across my small apartment's worn wooden floors, illuminating the potted herbs on my kitchen sill and the coffee cup I'd left half-finished the night before. I sat cross-legged on my futon laptop, balanced on my knees, reading the finalized divorce papers. Gregory had signed without contesting a single clause. No alimony, no asset disputes, just clean separation. Attached was a short personal note in his familiar handwriting. I still don't understand why you left, but I won't fight you anymore. I hope you find what you're looking for. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Relief mixed with something like sadness, but softer. An ache for what we'd hoped to become, rather than what we ever truly were. I placed the papers in a blue folder and slipped it into my filing cabinet, next to client contracts and design invoices. Life admin, nothing more. Outside gulls wheeled above the harbor, their cries echoing between the apartment blocks. The city felt awake, alive, full of possibility. Later that day, Olivia came over with fresh bagels and iced coffee. We sat on the narrow fire escape legs dangling into the cool spring breeze, watching people bustle below. Any regrets, she asked gently. I shook my head. Only that I stayed so long trying to fit into a life that never wanted me. She squeezed my hand. You didn't stay too long. You stayed exactly as long as you needed to learn what you know now. We sat in companionable silence, sipping coffee sun, warming our faces. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in lavender and rose, I drove to Discovery Park alone. I walked the familiar trails until I reached the bluff overlooking Puget Sound. The wind whipped my hair around my face as I sat on a driftwood log, hugging my knees to my chest. I pulled out my journal and flipped to a fresh page. Closure is quiet. It isn't grand gestures or cinematic speeches. It's signing a divorce paper in the morning sun, feeling nothing but a gentle untethering. It's looking at a man you once loved and realizing you no longer need him to love you back. It's sitting alone on a windswept cliff, breathing in salt air and knowing you are safe in your own company. It's understanding that freedom isn't the absence of pain, but the acceptance of truth. And it's knowing that the chapter is closed not with anger, but with grace. I closed the journal and tucked it into my bag, standing to watch the waves crashing against the distant shore. Amanda's words came back to me, carried on the ocean wind. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. But here now, in the quiet certainty of my own presence, I finally understood it didn't matter if they noticed, because I did. I noticed the woman I had become, resilient, creative, whole. I noticed the quiet bravery it took to walk away from a gilded cage into an uncertain dawn. I noticed the steadiness of my breath, the calm thrum of my heart, the strength in my legs as I turned back down the trail. I noticed, and that was enough. As darkness fell across the water, I walked back to my car, each step echoing with finality. I wasn't walking away anymore. I was walking forward into a new story that belonged only to me. 6 weeks later, I closed on my first home. It wasn't grand, by Caldwell standards, just a small cedar-shingled cottage tucked on a quiet street, lined with cherry blossoms. The front yard was a patchwork of moss and dandelions. The kitchen tiles were chipped, the cabinets painted sage green by some previous owner, with a steady hand and romantic taste. But as I turned the brass key in the lock, for the first time sunlight streaming through the bay window onto scuffed oak floors, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: belonging. I spent the next week sleeping on a mattress on the floor, the cardboard boxes stacked around me like a makeshift fortress. Each morning I woke to pale dawn light slanting across the ceiling, hearing birds chatter in the plum tree outside my window. Each night I fell asleep, listening to rain tapping against the roof, safe in the knowledge that this was mine, entirely mine. I bought second-hand furniture from local estate sales, a teak writing desk with deep drawers for sketchbooks, a velvet reading chair worn soft with age, mismatched ceramic mugs that felt heavy and grounding in my palms. I hung my grandmother's framed cross-stitch above the kitchen sink and placed Olivia's handmade pottery on open shelves. For the first time since college, every object I owned carried only my memories, unshadowed by someone else's history. Work flourished. The Sheffield campaign went national, with glowing press coverage sparking inquiries from other major brands. Eleanor introduced me to a women's creative collective where I rented a small studio space. I spent days surrounded by photographers, illustrators, and copywriters, each of us lost in our own craft, yet united by the quiet hum of creativity. No one cared about last names or pedigrees, only the quality of ideas and the generosity of spirit. I took up pottery classes on Thursday nights, hands slick with wet clay, shaping imperfect bowls that curved inward like cupped palms. I joined Olivia for Sunday farmers markets, buying crisp apples and wildflower honey, walking home with canvas bags cutting into my shoulders and the breeze lifting my hair. I began dating again tentatively, a filmmaker with sea green eyes and calloused fingers from hours of camera work, a barista poet who wrote haikus on napkins. Nothing serious yet, but each connection reminded me of possibility, of laughter, of intimacy, without obligation. Therapy shifted from trauma processing to vision building. Dr. Lewis asked me last week, "What do you want now, Vanessa?" I closed my eyes and answered without hesitation. I want a life where I am fully present in my own story, where my worth isn't measured by what I can give, but by who I am, where I create because I love it, not to prove anything. And I want to wake up each morning knowing that whatever happens that day, I choose it. This morning I brewed coffee in my new kitchen, steam curling into the soft golden light. I sat at my teak desk overlooking the garden, sketching ideas for a brand that hired me not for connections or appearances, but because they believed in my vision. And I realized Amanda's words had been a curse that became a gift. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. I did disappear. From them. From a life where I was invisible. And in doing so, I reappeared in my own life, more visible than I had ever been. I closed my sketchbook and looked around my quiet cottage, my chest swelling, with something fierce and gentle all at once. Joy. Not the joy of external validation or performative belonging, but the quiet humming joy of knowing I am here. I am enough. And this beginning, this small, imperfect, radiant beginning is entirely mine.